In this video, I go looking for an American duck with my mum. I finally catch up with the UK's smallest bird of prey, and on a birding trip to North Wales, I get a pleasant surprise. This video starts with myself and a very important family member taking a trip into Lancashire to a park in St Helens. Hey folks, I am in St Helens in Lancashire with a very special person, my mum. Say hi.
Hi.
We are here looking for an American duck. It's a bird we have seen this year, the ring-necked duck. But with it being so close, it's worth a look. But I've just seen the bit of water in front of me and it looks like it might be a bit of a challenge finding it because it's quite big. Stick with us, let's see what we find. Arriving at the park, we almost immediately saw the pond. And it was a big pond with what appeared to be many ducks. Most of these ducks were the endlessly common mallard duck, with the majority of these being near the cafe, waiting for scraps. Alongside the mallards there were some equally hungry looking black-headed gulls, and on the small jetty we did notice a pair of moorhen feeding. Both of these birds were ringed. Our challenge was to find the ring-necked duck, which can look very similar to the tufted duck, of which unfortunately for us there was plenty of here. We set about walking on the path that goes all the way around the lake, scanning and checking out every group of tufted ducks we can see, trying to pick out a bird that looks just a little bit different. And as this bird had only been reported about half an hour previous, we were pretty confident we'd find it. En route round the lake we spotted this white domestic duck having a good preen, and as we got halfway we noticed this swan chasing its young. It appears that the young bird may have outstayed its welcome with its parents. After a long chase, the young bird flew off and landed on another part of the pond, only to be chased again later on. Back to our ring-necked duck hunt. We were only seeing tufted ducks, and as my confidence was fading, we did see another birder. So we hot-footed it to see if he'd found the duck we were after. And he had. Amongst a group of 3 other tufted ducks, all sleeping, was our ring-necked duck. It's the bird at the back of this video, the one with slightly darker sides, and more of a lump on the back of the head than a tuft. This species also is a little chunkier and heavy set, and although it was wonderfully close to us, it didn't stick its head up. It stayed roosting. It wasn't asleep though, you can see its eyes open as it paddled itself around, avoiding crashing into other ducks. This species, although all the way from America, has been seen in increasing numbers over the last few years, with occurrences of multiple birds turning up on some occasions, and some birds turning up to the same site annually. There is somewhere an island at the moment that's got 10 of this species present, 7 of which are drakes like this one. After a while it did stick its head up, but only momentarily, and then tucked it back under its wing. Determined to try and get some more footage of this duck with its head not under its wing, we remained patiently hoping that it had stopped preening or feeding. We watched the other birds around us, most of which were tufted ducks and coots. We were occasionally entertained by the swan's ongoing family dramas, with the adults still unsuccessfully getting the young swans to leave. At this point time was getting on and I was about to leave until the ring-necked duck woke up for a minute, had a bit of a scratch and a stretch, and then went back to sleep again. But that was enough for me to get a reasonable enough little bit of footage. Fantastic, what a cool duck. We now headed back to the car and headed back on the road, this time towards Hale Lighthouse. Hey folks, we got the ring-necked duck, although most of the time we were there it was sleeping. Luckily it did stick its head up a couple of times so we could see it. So that's a nice sighting of an American duck close to home. We've now come a little bit down the road to Hale Lighthouse. I don't know what we're going to see here. We've got about half an hour or so we're going to have a wander, see what's here. Stick with us. We wandered on the long path towards the lighthouse. On each side of us some fields. In one of the fields there was a group of curlew feeding alongside some black-headed gulls, and right near us on some mud a very handsome pied wagtail. As we headed down the path the skies became greyer. Nevertheless we carried on and got to the shore. There were a small amount of birds on the water's edge, a couple of redshank feeding in the mud, and a few ducks. Many of them were mollards, like this group that were having some kind of dispute. I did notice one different duck, which was a teal, feeding just on the edge of the mud. We walked along a bank that's got farmland on one side and looks over the mudflats on the other. On the water's edge there were a number of wading birds. We saw a few oyster catchers, like this one that was having a bath, and its audience was a group of dunlin that were feeding right on the tide line. Slightly further up we saw some bigger waders. These were grey plovers, or as our American audience call black-bellied plovers. These were roosting in small groups. Unfortunately though, we started to feel rain, so slowly headed back towards the car, along the track and then back past the field with the curlews. Hey folks, we're just heading back to the car now. Mum's a little bit ahead of me. Rain stopped play. We walked down to the front, saw a few waders and ducks and such, but we couldn't stick around long because it's hammering it down. A few days later, I got up early and headed towards the Wirral. Good morning folks, the sun's just coming up and I am on the Wirral at Burton Marsh. The reason I'm here is to try and tick Merlin off of our year list finally. We've been looking for it a few times but not found it. So on our last video we went to have a look at snow bunting and met a birding friend called Alex, and he gave us a heads up saying here might be a good place to finally get it off our year list. So let's go looking. Alex had given me a vague idea of whereabouts I might see a Merlin, and this meant walking on a long path with the estuary and marshes on one side and farmland on the other. On the farmland there were a few birds already awake, like this pied wagtail, and further up a pheasant sat on the wall. I continued walking for a while, ultimately arriving at a turn in the path. This takes you through a gate and down a grass bank, with the marsh on one side and some grassland with fence posts on the other. The views over the marshland were absolutely stunning, making me realise how absolutely huge this area is. Whilst walking down the grass verge, looking at every post I can, hoping for Merlins, an incredible number of geese were flying over. This was not only amazing to watch, but very noisy too. Looking out onto the marsh itself, there were some small areas of shallow water that were occupied by quite a few birds. The most numerous by far here were lapwing. I walked quite far along this bank, scanning both sides, hoping for Merlin, until I got to a point I thought I might be disturbing some sheep if I carried on, so I thought I'd better turn back. But before I did, I spotted a bird of prey flying low over the marsh. This large, elegant hunter is the aptly named marsh harrier, and this individual's a female, with generally chocolate brown plumage, whereas the male of the species has large amounts of grey on the wing. I watched this stunning bird for a while and then headed back on the path, stopping en route to check out this stone chat. This little bird is a male. Whilst I was watching him, I noticed a bird closer to me, which turned out to be a female. I was about to get off the bank and head back towards the car until I heard some noise behind me. When I turned round, it was a pair of great white egrets that were having some kind of disagreement. So I headed back down the bank to have a look what was going on. Eventually they separated and one egret flew across the marsh. I thought whilst I was back here I'd have one last scan over the fence posts, and I'm glad I did, because in the distance I saw the shape of a bird of prey on a post. Is this the Merlin I'm looking for? I genuinely thought I was jinxed with this bird. Not as much as water pipit, but still pretty jinxed. But in front of me, at a bit of a distance, so prepare for shaky footage, but there's not only one but two Merlin, a pair, sitting separately on a fence. That is mental. I wasn't going to walk back up this path, but I'm glad I did now. That is super cool. These birds were at quite a distance, so the footage is pretty shaky, but finally managing to get our smallest bird of prey on film this year felt like quite an achievement. That was amazing, and I know it was at a distance, but I've never ever seen a pair of Merlin together before, so that's a first for me. It's not a bird I've seen many times actually. It's a handful, 2 or 3. So excellent. Really happy. After the excitement of finally getting these amazing birds on our year list, I slowly headed on the long path towards the car. Passing this little egret en route, I did stop when I heard a very distinctive bird song. Hey folks, I'm heading back to the car, but I just spotted a bird that's often heard and not that often seen, the Chetty's warbler. This one was weirdly showy, jumping around in the marsh and the trees. Fantastic. Chetty's warblers used to be pretty rare in the UK, but have colonised in recent years pretty successfully, and it was lovely to see one out in the open. A little bit further down the path, I did spot a lovely song thrush that was jumping around in the tree. As I got a little bit nearer the car, I had to scan out onto the marsh. As there was such high numbers of geese coming in, I wanted to stick around and watch for a while. And although most of the geese were Canada geese, there was one mixed flock that grabbed my attention, because one of my favourite geese was amongst them, the barnacle goose. This is a small, smart looking black and white goose. Unfortunately, I couldn't watch these geese forever, so I headed on the last little bit towards the car, passing a field with some rooks, and in the grass near the car, a small flock of goldfinch were feeding, oblivious that they were being overlooked by a kestrel. This had been a pretty successful trip out, finally getting Merlin onto our year list. A few days later I had a free morning, so I headed to the coast. Hey folks, I'm at Gronant in North Wales, which is a very important site for the little tern, which you can see behind me. They breed here in spring and summer. It's Wales' only breeding colony, but now it's winter, so they've got. I am here hopefully to see lots of waders because it's high tide. Stick with me, let's see what we find. To get to the beach you have to walk down a path with marsh on one side and a golf course on the other, eventually getting to a boardwalk which takes you through a dune system, and finally onto the beach. It was reasonably early, but almost immediately I saw a bird of prey flying in the distance. Eventually, as I walked further, I noticed it was a marsh harrier. Finally, as I got down to the beach, I noticed the tide was getting quite close in. So I walked along the beach, but on the edge of the dunes. It didn't take me long to find the first group of wading birds, which were ringed plovers, sat amongst the rocks. A little bit further up the beach I noticed a few oyster catchers, and as I walked further, many more. I have never seen this many oyster catchers in my life. Along the shoreline, as far as the eye could see, there were oyster catchers, hundreds of them, and after a short while they all took to the skies. After a fly around they landed a little bit further up the beach, and when I got close to them I noticed they weren't alone. Closer to the water's edge there were large groups of smaller shorebirds. Upon scanning the large flock I noticed that most of the birds were dunlin, with some sanderling amongst them. These are the paler, slightly stockier birds. After a short while of watching them the flock took off, flying round in what seemed to be a formation, eventually landing, and then soon taking off again. Watching waders like this is endlessly entertaining, but at this point I thought I'd walk further up the beach, leaving the hordes of oyster catchers behind. Eventually I came to a larger area of mud, which is around an outflow from a river. Here I started to see gulls, lots of them, and many species too. There were common gull, black-headed gull, lots and lots of herring gull, and also some greater blackback gulls too. As the tide came in closer, the gulls moved with it, sometimes taking off in an enormous flock. The tide was coming in quick. This little video is in real time. I thought I'd head back before I got trapped on the mud. Heading back along the beach, a lot of the waders were moving up the beach towards where the gulls were, as this was the last exposed bit of sand. Walking further, there were a few oyster catchers remaining, but those and the remaining dunlin and sanderling were very mobile. As the tide was really far in, I walked through the dune system, and as I got back to the path that takes me back through the dunes, I noticed this large flock that were moving around almost like a shoal of fish. Incredible. Hey folks, I hope you can hear me. It's very windy, but that was excellent. I did bump into another bird who said that in previous days there's been a glaucous gull here, which is a little bit unusual. That should be further north, but it could have been brought in by the storm. Luckily we've seen a couple of those this year, so not a massive loss not seeing it, although it would have been nice. I got back on the boardwalk and walked through the dune system and on into the marshy area, seeing this stone chat. A little bit further down the path, I did see something else really special. Hey folks, I've just seen something pretty exciting and something that I didn't expect at all. I was walking back towards the car and I passed a reed bed and I heard a noise which I recognised, but I did have to check. And it was a bearded tit. It called within the reeds, so I stuck around for a few minutes and then finally it came to the front of the reed bed very briefly and then flew off. But that was unbelievably cool, amazing, awesome. Bearded tits, or bearded reedlings as they're also known, are a Schedule 1 species and pretty rare in the UK, with only about 650 breeding pairs. They're very localised generally to coastal marshes, but sometimes will disperse in autumn and winter. And luckily for me, this wonderful male bird's shown up here. Well, that was amazing. Not only did I see hundreds of waders, which I wanted to come here for, I got the happy surprise of a bearded tit at the end, which, after I told you about it before, I stuck around a little bit more and it was pretty showy. Briefly, but pretty showy. Amazing, awesome. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and please press the notification bell. We will see you soon.